Hello, this is Taylor for CSC 110. This is quiz number 8. Starting with question 1, created two functions here. This first one calculates quadratic. So first I assigned a variable quad to the equation here and then returned quad. I did the same thing for the power function, assigned power and then returned it. So I'll print it with these two statements to show that. Okay, so as you can see, if you, for the quadratic, if you plug these in, a equals 2, b equals 5, c equals 3, and x equals 2, it comes out to 21, running it through this equation, and then also same thing for power, except running it through that equation. And then I checked it with my calculator, so these are right. And for this next question here, oops. This is going to count step size starting from x0 to x1, and then n is the number of steps, and then del x is my size of the steps. So I started by subtracting the first point from the second point or the last point, and then dividing that by the number of steps minus 1, because you don't count that first number that you start with because there's no step to it, it's just steps from it. And then I returned del x. For question 4, that one will test out my function using 0 as the first point, 9 as the last, and then 4 as the number of steps. And that comes out to 3, so just to kind of check that, starting at 0, 0 plus 3 is 3, plus 3 is 6, plus 3 is 9. That gives me a total of 4 points across, each with 3 step size. Oops. Okay, and then for question number 5, let me run that one. Okay, so question number 5, I started by, this I didn't want to do. I started by assigning del x. Again, I just used the same variable name for this one so I would remember it, but this is still the step size. And then I used my helper function for that. Then I also assigned n as a variable for my range that I'm going to be going through. Because you can't send a float through the range, I assigned it and then turned it into an integer. So I'd be able to use a for loop to run through it. I then assigned x as basically every time it takes a step, it takes that step and then runs it through whichever function. For this one, it happens to be the quadratic. So x now equals 0.5 in the quadratic function. It moves on to the next one using the step size, which is 1.5, 2.5. So yeah, it runs through here, and then at each step it goes through the quadratic for each of those. And then question number 6, exact same thing. However, instead of going through a for loop, we're using while. So I still have my step size assigned here using my helper function, and then I assigned the initial x as the first number, the first point, and then as long as that is less than or equal to the last point, then it will run through this. It'll print my function, and then it'll run through. It'll actually go up one for each, go up through each step by the step size. So it cycles through that until the x is equal to that last point. So I will run, for number 7, I'll run both of the functions. So just to show the first, using power function in here for my first table, my for loop, and then running it through the second one, the while loop, and they should be the exact same. Hello, this is Taylor for CSC 110. This is quiz number 8. Question number 1, I have created a function to return a quadratic as well as power. I started by assigning variable quad to the equation and then returning quad. I did something very similar to power, except I assigned it power and then returned the power. Question 2 is to then call those functions. I'm just going to print it out here to show that it runs through here. Okay, so quad 1, it takes a equals 2, b equals 5, c equals 3, and x equals 2, and runs it through the equation. Does the exact same thing for power, and then I just used a calculator to check these to make sure that my calculations were coming out right on here. Okay, and then question number 3, I created a function to count step size starting from x0 to x1, with n being the number of steps. So the step size I assigned del x, and then I took the last number minus the first number and then divided it by n minus 1 because it doesn't count that first number as having a step because that's where it's starting, and then I just returned del x as my step size. Question number 4, I'm just going to print that out. Okay, so question number 4 is just to call that function and then print it out with the label so that my del x, my size, is 3.1, or excuse me, 3.0. Given that my first point is 0, my last point is 9, and then there are a total of 4 steps. So 0 to 3 to 6, and then into 9, so that's 4. Okay, and then question number 5, let me run that one. Okay, so for this one, I'm using my for loop, and I'm creating a table. On the left here is my step sizes, or excuse me, my step sizes that are going to be plugged into a function as x. So I started by, again, assigning del x inside of this function so it knows what that means, which is going to be using my x step helper function. So it'll find the size, and then I assigned n to, because I can't range through a float, I wanted to create it as an integer of my equation of basically finding each step through so it knows how to go through this. And then I assigned x to, so it takes each number and then multiplies it by the size plus that first initial point just so that x can run through these, and then for each one of these it puts x through the function so that can be used with either the quadratic or the power. I ran it through the quadratic, so these first 3 numbers here are for the quadratic, and then these other numbers here are for going through my step equation, and then it combines them down here. Okay, and then question number 6, I did the same thing except I used a while loop, so I'll run that one and it should be the same, which is question 7, just showing that both of these will come out with the same thing. But for the while loop, I started with a counter because I need to know pretty much when to stop going through this. So while the counter is less than n, which is going to be my total number of steps here, again, I assigned del x as my size, so I know the size of the steps. Runs through here, does the same thing. It starts with showing that x number, and then also showing that x going through the function, and then it updates my counter, so I know at which point to stop the while function. Okay, and as you can see, it gave me the exact same numbers using this one up here is my for loop, and then this one down here is the while loop.